Hi, I'm Jess Wood from Sandringham Wood Recruitment. We specialise in recruiting within the financial services profession. We're based in Bristol and we work with companies around the UK. I've been doing this quite a while now. In fact, it was 16 years last week. We carry out a lot of recruitment within the IFA financial planning profession. And since RDR came into force in December 2012, there have been a lot of changes in the financial planning sector. My guest who will be spending the next 20 minutes or so with me is Dawn Pearce-Herzberg. Dawn has seen many of these changes firsthand, having played a pivotal role in the setting up of the national financial planning company Bell Penny, and more recently starting her own company, Vines Row. Dawn, thanks for joining me today. Tell me a bit about yourself and your new business.
Hi Jess, thanks for inviting me. I have had a long career in financial services stemming from Australia back in the late 80s. When I returned to the UK at the beginning of the 90s, I've really had a game of two halves in terms of my career during that time. Firstly, doing consultancy work through an old company of mine called Purple Patch Consulting, which helped IFAs to work more effectively with accountants and lawyers. And then secondly, and more recently, I've set up and run two wealth management companies. The first back in the late 90s, which was a company called Dunbar Independent. We set up by Allied Dunbar, and then more recently Bell Penny, as you mentioned. So I wrote the business plan for Bell Penny and then started to set it up at the beginning of 2012. We finally got our permissions in October 2012, and by the time I left at the end of May in 2015, we had bought 25 businesses. It was during that time that I recognised the use of introducers or brokers in the market. So an IFA company that is looking to sell their business predominantly will look to utilise a broker to help facilitate the matchmaking that's required in order to make sure that their transaction goes through smoothly. So we worked with a number of introducers, but I recognised that actually there's a lack of knowledge in the market around how the acquisition of businesses works, and really what the integration of a business should look like and how that should be driven through. So that's where Vines Row has come from. A little bit about Vines Row. It's a very simple proposition. Firstly, we do business matching, which you would expect. So we have sellers and buyers on our books, and we carry out a full fact find to find out exactly what both parties are looking for. Secondly, we work with companies to help to prepare their business for sale. That could be within the next 3 or 6 months, or it could be as far away as 10 years. And then lastly, we also help businesses who want to buy to find businesses that might not know they want to sell yet, but when the proposition is found out, would perhaps look to take up the offer.
Okay. Well, there's obviously been a lot of changes within the industry over the years, which is where your business proposition comes in, and hopefully do a great matchmaking service for those advisors that are looking to sell their business. I'd like to look at things a bit more from sort of staffing angle, because obviously me being in recruitment, that would make more sense. So I was wondering, when IFA businesses are looking to sell and they've made that decision to sell, what should they consider when it comes to communicating this to their existing staff?
The big criteria, because we're quite a cottage industry, is to communicate as soon as possible with staff. I talk about the cottage industry bit particularly because we tend to run businesses in the IFA marketplace that are very close-knit. So from the point of view of the principals working with their staff, they can almost become like family, and therefore any strategic changes that are coming up in the future really should be communicated as early as possible with staff. Staff like to be treated as adults, so they like to know what's going on, and they like to be able to at least have some kind of feedback into what might happen in the future. So particularly where IFAs are looking to retire, staff are quite aware that there's going to be a change in the future and are very open to it and prefer to know up front rather than finding out perhaps further down the line.
Okay, no, because I get that quite a lot. Obviously, from our point of view, we do get people coming to us saying, "Oh, we think that the business is looking to be sold. We're not, we're not being told anything. I don't feel that my job might be here in 3 months' time, so that's why I'm looking to register with you now." And quite often, we'll work with those people to not necessarily say, "Oh, yes, register straight away. We'll find you something else," but talk to them about what they could ask the employers, what information they feel that they can glean to make them less uncertain. And I think exactly what you're saying, is that they should be more, there should be more openness and transparency, because the last thing these business owners want to do, and I think I've experienced this before, where they haven't been completely upfront with what's going on, they sometimes run the risk of losing some really key members of staff if they do start to wobble. So that sort of leads me on to the next thing. There is potentially the rumour mill within the office, and what can the advisors do to limit that as much as possible, so they don't run the risk of losing somebody good from their existing team.
Yeah, part of that is obviously around communicating as soon as possible, but actually sitting down with individuals or as a group initially, and then as individuals afterwards, to explain what's going to happen and why they're looking to make the strategic change that they're looking to make, and then laying fears from the staff's point of view about the fact that they're going to be involved in that strategic change, sitting down with them individually afterwards and talking about what their career aspirations are, what good would look like for them going forward. So whether that's within a new organisation or whether that's actually is now a time that they would like to think about what their options are, and to then talk them through how those options might be maximised. So you may have a paraplanner who says, actually, I've been thinking about it for a while and I really do want to get out and start advising clients rather than just doing paraplanning. So what are the key things that would be needed from an experience, knowledge perspective in order to be able to do that in the future, again, whether it's with the new company or whether it's with somebody else. So getting that communication out early, treating people like adults. If you hear that the rumour mill has started, stamp on it straight away. These things do happen. People leave out documents that they're not supposed to, and they don't realise they've done it. All sorts of things can happen, and staff do recognise changes in patterns of work behaviour or in the way that they're being communicated with, so they are quite clear about the fact that things are afoot.
Yeah, particularly in a smaller business as well.
Yeah.
You might have the stray email that ends up somewhere it shouldn't, and then the gossip starts and the rumour mill starts. So trying to stamp that out. I suppose as well, if you've got staff within the business that have been with a company a number of years, and they want to take those staff to, say, the business that's buying them, maybe, where I've experienced is that some of those people aren't as qualified as they should be. So the acquiring company has a benchmark for these existing, for any staff to have a certain level of financial services qualifications.
Yeah.
I think it would be worthwhile with some of these businesses, and I don't know if you agree, that if you are going through the selling process, that you help this existing staff that you've got as much as you possibly can, support financially and all the rest of it, for them to gain those qualification levels, so they're not left necessarily out in the cold, maybe, if they don't meet the new company's criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we certainly had that at Bellpenny, which you'll know, Jess. We made the decision right at the beginning that we only wanted diploma qualified paraplanners, and I stand by that decision. I think it was a good quality business decision to make. But clearly, as you've rightly stated, you then are placed in a position sometimes where maybe it's difficult to recruit those people in the first place, because those types of people are sought after. But B, you may purchase a business where they have very good paraplanning staff who aren't, as you say, qualified. And what we had to do at Bellpenny was to come up with a new type of paraplanning role in which those people could slot into. We really would have preferred that we just had diploma qualified paraplanners and that was it.
Yeah.
And we would have still worked with those people then to become qualified anyway. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think getting people qualified for the role that they are going to fulfill is really important. I think the other thing to think about as well is that where a business is being sold, so an acquirer is buying a business in and they're buying the staff in as part of the proposal, often they're doing that for a reason, and that is because they're looking for good quality people that they haven't necessarily been able to recruit in organically. So again, the whole communication piece and keeping people on board could be crucial to whether a deal will go through, because if you lose your good quality staff because you didn't communicate with them, actually the deal isn't as attractive as perhaps it once was. So that kind of thing has to be really taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, because those people say they're very, very experienced, but they don't necessarily have all the qualifications. They've still got the relationships with those clients, whether they're an advisor, in my opinion, the IFA administrator, or the paraplanner. You know,
Yeah.
those relationships are key, and that's what you want to maintain, because if that breaks down, what have you really bought?
Yeah.
You've just got a big long client list with no
Yeah.
sort of substance behind it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if someone's buying the business and unfortunate redundancies do have to be made, how should companies handle that process?
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult thing to obviously go through. The most important thing is to make sure that you've got a good quality HR expert or HR lawyer employed who understands the I's that need to be dotted and the T's that need to be crossed. It's a very easy trap to fall into from an employment law perspective, that you don't actually do the right thing and then you can wind up in a litigious issue. So it's not a good thing to get into. I think the second thing to say again is to communicate effectively with staff about what's going to happen, what their role is in what's going to happen, what their responsibilities are, and ensure all the way through the HR consultation process that they understand fully what's happening, and more importantly what's going to happen post the HR consultation. Things like allowing people to take time off to go home and reflect, give them time, sort of one-to-one time to ask questions if they need to. All of those sorts of things are really key, along with a real sort of empathetic approach, because you know these things, regardless of whether they know it's even going to happen, can still be quite daunting and quite shocking as a process as it happens.
Yeah, it's not a nice position to be in if you've
No.
been with the company a long time. So I think the more support that the company can offer these people, the better. And
Yeah.
whether that means working maybe with another recruitment company to help in and talk to those staff about other job possibilities, or management, because the outsourced consultancy firms, particularly with some of these people that've been with these businesses a long time, the chances are they have been very loyal and they haven't been out on interview every 5 minutes, so they'll need sort of help with interview technique, what to say, what not to say, all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, you're absolutely spot on. I think it's a really good point, Jess. Utilising the outsourced outplacement companies, there are plenty of them out there. Most of them are very good, and they can help with things like getting a very focused CV together, learning some interview techniques, going through some role plays so it doesn't feel like you're going into it brand new, helping people to understand how to stretch themselves. So rather than look at a role that they might like the look of but think that's not for me, I'm not good enough, perhaps helping them to understand whether they could be, and or what are the sorts of key things that they might need to take on board, again, knowledge, experience, qualification wise, that might enable them to take those roles on for the future. So the outsourced outplacement companies have a really good job to role to play there.
No, I think definitely they do. What would you say are the sort of biggest mistakes that you've seen, and what were the consequences of that in terms of how the staff and team felt and how they were impacted?
Yeah, okay. Again, this is probably going to come back to communication, but it was the biggest thing that we learned, or certainly I learned during my time at Bell Penny. So I can give you an example of where the communication worked really well, and we therefore had an easier transition, and an example where it didn't work at all well, and we all wound up with egg on our face. So both of these purchases happened within a couple of months of each other. The first was a fairly immature company, so they'd only been in business for about 4.5 years. They were young employers, young staff, and the employers took it upon themselves to tell their staff right at the beginning what they were doing and why they were doing it, and then importantly, as they went along, talked to the staff about who they were looking at from an acquisition perspective. When they started to deselect, they took them through that piece of the process, and then by the time Bell Penny was selected, they were absolutely aware who we were, where we were looking to take the company, what their roles and responsibilities would be going forward. So even though we had bumps in the road, and you always do, we had a very committed and very positive approach from both sides on the fact that we'd made this transaction and it was a good quality business for us to buy, and we valued the people that came with it. Conversely, 2 months later, we purchased another company where we kept the staff and office, and despite our advice around the fact that this previous company that we purchased in a very similar manner had communicated right from the beginning, they, for whatever reason, decided that that wasn't the way that they wanted to conduct it, and the first that their staff knew about it was the day day that an HR lawyer and a Bell Penny executive turned up on their doorstep to carry out a 2-week HR consultation. The consequences were we actually lost staff, sadly, we lost clients, and everybody was really demotivated and not really interested in being committed to Bell Penny going forward. So, you know, it had a huge impact on the staff, but also on the sellers' revenue, because clearly when you start to lose clients, you will lose revenue. And a lot of the deferred considerations that are paid on businesses are predicated around the revenue that's been bought actually being there in a year and 2 years' time. So yeah, it's definitely one to be aware of.
I suppose that sort of happened in the earlier days, isn't it? It was one of the first few acquisitions that Bell Penny made.
Mm-hmm.
So did that make you think, right, okay, going forward, you know, that's a lesson learned, don't want to go down that road again, very painful and not great all round. So
Yeah.
did that make you guys at the time then think, right, okay, so now any acquisition that we approach going forward, we really want to work with a company that is willing to be upfront with their staff to try to avoid that sort of pain happening all over again?
Yeah, it absolutely did. Unfortunately, it's such an emotional transaction for people who are selling their businesses, and the last thing that they welcome is advice. So what they want is for somebody to be very empathetic to the position that they're in and the decision that they're making, and for you to say you absolutely must do X, Y, and Z, one of which is quite an emotional thing, tends to be either ignored or it becomes a deal breaker. So we have had people that we've said, you know, you absolutely need to speak with your staff. We can't proceed with this deal unless you do. And they've said, well, on that basis, then we really aren't prepared to take the risk. Because, of course, the risk is when the HR consultation happens, you haven't actually written on the dotted line and signed the contract. So there's always that little bit of hiatus where there's a possibility the transaction won't go through. But, you know, it swings and roundabouts, and so we always gave that advice, and where possible applied the pressure to make sure that happened. But if they categorically wouldn't do it, then we would still go with it.
I suppose from their point of view, because it's still in a sort of consultation, like I say, consultation process, and you know, no one signed on the dotted line, would they then want to run the risk of telling the staff for the deal not to go through, and then the staff still wobble and end up registering with somebody like myself anyway? So I can imagine it's quite a difficult.
It is a difficult one
to follow. Yeah, absolutely. There are a number of companies out in the marketplace at the moment, you know, broking the buying and selling of advisory firms.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, a lot of them tend to have been more sort of recruitment companies that have gone down that road. Not something I really have thought of doing, but it is, you know, that has been quite the norm. How would you say to advisory firms that were looking to start the business, how to spot a good firm and how to spot a bad one, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the key is to feel like you're being listened to. I think the key is to actually meet the introducer, so that you know that the introducer knows you, they know what your business is like, and you can then secondly sit down and conduct a thorough fact find. Not only the fact find being done on the seller, but also the seller can then conduct a bit of a fact find on the introducer as well to find out what their background is. So I get asked a lot about, so what was my experience of Bell Penny? Why did I make the decision to leave? All of those sorts of things. So, you know, it's a good quality opportunity to build a relationship from the early days. And then also, I think the other thing is to understand from the introducer what acquirers they work with and what due diligence they've done on those acquirers as well. So from a seller's perspective, do I feel happy that a business that you're going to perhaps place me with and give me, you know, full knowledge about, are they likely to be able to execute this transaction when it's needed? Are they going to be able to integrate my business in the way that I expected it to? Do they have the right investment philosophy, the right culture? And importantly, are they going to have the money in the future to be able to pay me out when I'm expecting it? So, you know, as a good introducer, you should be able to find those things out. So it's quite simple, I think, to ask those sorts of questions from a seller's perspective and feel satisfied that you're working with the right person.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think those are definitely good point. I mean, it's a bit like recruitment. You need to know and understand both parties. You need to know the business that you're representing, the business that you're trying to, make attractive, if you like, to other people that might want to buy it as well, and juggle both of those things all the time with as much information that you can give to make the proper match. It is matchmaking at the end of the day, because I suppose you're. From my point of view, when I'm placing candidates and stuff, I want to make sure that when they go and join that firm, they're going to be there for a long time and it's all going to work. And I suppose from an acquirer's point of view, if they're buying a business, they want that business to sort of fit their ethos and their culture too.
No, absolutely right. I think the cultural piece and the career opportunities are really important, aren't they? So it's not just about the knowledge and experience and qualifications, so the past stuff that somebody brings to the party, it's also about the future on both sides. And I think you're absolutely spot on from a recruitment perspective. That's very important to understand.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time today. It's been great talking with you. And I'd like everyone to join me next time when I'll be talking to Emma Hannay, the HR manager of Financial Express. And we'll be covering things like employer branding, employee engagement, and making sure people get a good overall interview experience and all the do's and don'ts. So thanks for your time as well today, Dawn.
No worries. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.